The huge meeting room was filled with strange sounds. Clicks, hisses, and electronic beeps echoed off the metal walls as dozens of alien beings talked among themselves. Some looked like giant insects with shiny shells. Others were as tall as trees with 4 arms each. Few seemed to be made of pure energy, floating in special containers. Ambassador Lisa Grant stood at the center of it all. She wore her best uniform, the dark blue fabric, crisp and clean. Her hands shook just a little as she held the datapad containing Earth's formal request. This was the moment humanity had worked toward for years. Beside her, Commander Jake Morrison stood perfectly still. His weathered face showed nothing, but his eyes watched every alien in the room. Jake had fought in 3 wars on different planets. He knew what real combat looked like. These creatures had never seen humans fight for real. The leader of the meeting was High Counselor Vexter from the Zephyrian Empire. His body looked like it was made of blue crystal, and his voice came through a machine that turned his words into English. So, Vextar began, his crystal form catching the light. The humans want to join our military alliance. They think they can help us fight the great wars of space. Laughter filled the room. It sounded like breaking glass mixed with the buzz of angry insects. The alien delegates found this very funny. War Chief Crackle slammed one of his 4 massive fists on the table. The Vorthan warrior was 3 times taller than any human, with gray skin like stone and eyes that glowed red. These soft pink creatures think they can fight real enemies, he rumbled. Look at them. They break so easily. More laughter echoed through the chamber. Lisa kept her face calm, but Jake felt his jaw tighten. He had seen what humans could do when pushed too far. Elder Nexari Southis spoke without moving its mouth. The words appeared directly in everyone's minds through the room's neural network. Our computers have studied human warfare. They fight with primitive weapons, like metal bullets and chemical explosives. Very basic technology. Vextar activated a holographic display above the meeting table. Images of human soldiers appeared in the air, fighting in various battles throughout history. We have collected many human stories, he said, his translator making his amusement clear. They call them legends of heroism. The first image showed a soldier jumping on a grenade to save his friends. The aliens watched with what looked like confusion. This human destroyed himself to save 5 others, Vextar explained. This makes no logical sense. The loss of 6 soldiers instead of 5 is mathematically worse. War Chief Craggle nodded his massive head. Inefficient. A proper warrior preserves himself to fight another day. The next image showed a pilot ramming his damaged fighter plane into an enemy ship. Then came pictures of humans fighting impossible odds, outnumbered 100 to 1, but never surrendering. More examples of poor tactical thinking. Elder Zalthus projected into their minds. Humans become emotional in combat. This creates weakness that enemies can exploit. The star gestured to another set of images. These showed human rescue workers running into burning buildings, soldiers carrying wounded comrades through enemy fire, and medical teams treating injured enemies alongside their own people. They even waste resources helping their opponents, Vexter said. During their wars, humans often provide medical care to captured enemies. This extends conflicts unnecessarily. The alien delegates buzzed with more laughter. To them, these human actions seemed foolish and wasteful. Lisa finally spoke up. Her voice was steady, despite the mocking all around her. Those aren't just stories, she said. They're examples of who we are. Humans don't fight just for victory. We fight for what's right. This caused even more laughter. A delegate from the Corvani Republic, who looked like a giant mantis, clicked his mandibles together rapidly. Fighting for abstract concepts, he chittered. How primitive. War Chief Craggle stood up to his full height, towering over the human delegation. Let me explain real warfare to you, little humans. Soon, the Drakari swarm will discover your location. They are insects who eat entire planets. They have destroyed 1,000 worlds. He activated his own holographic display, showing massive bioships shaped like beetles and wasps. The Drakari have weapons that dissolve flesh in seconds. Their ships can crack planets in half. What will your primitive bullets do against them? Elder Zalthus added his thoughts to everyone's minds. The Drakari operate as a hive mind. Millions of warriors thinking as one. Human individual thinking cannot compete with such coordination. Vexter looked directly at Lisa and Jake. Your legends speak of humans who sacrifice themselves for others. The Drakari will give you many chances to do this. But sacrifice without victory is just waste. The formal vote began. Each alien delegation cast their decision into this central computer. The results appeared on screens around the room in dozens of languages. The Galactic Council has reached its decision, Vexter announced. Earth's application for military alliance membership is rejected. You will receive no weapons, no protection, and no support under galactic law. Jake Morrison stepped forward for the first time during the meeting. His boots clicked on the metal floor as he approached the council table. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, but carried clearly through the room. You've made your choice, he said simply. Now you'll see what human legends really look like. Some of the aliens tittered with amusement at his words. Others looked puzzled by his calm confidence. Lisa gathered her papers and datapads. As the human delegation prepared to leave, they could hear the aliens already discussing other business. To them, humanity was already forgotten. But as they walked toward the exit, War Chief Craggle called out, "Human Commander," he rumbled. "The Drakari come for your worlds. Remember that you chose pride over survival." Jake stopped and turned back. His eyes met the giant alien's glowing gaze. "When they come," Jake said, "you'll learn the difference between legends and fairy tales." That night, in their quarters aboard the space station, Lisa reviewed the recordings of the meeting. Jake stood by the window, looking out at the stars. Both of them knew what the intelligence report said. The Drakari swarm was already moving toward human space. "They think our stories are just made-up tales," Lisa said quietly. Jake nodded without turning from the window. "They'll find out different soon enough. When the shooting starts, they'll see what we're really made of." Outside their window, the stars seemed to pulse with distant light. Somewhere out there, in the dark between worlds, an ancient enemy was coming. Aliens, who laughed at human legends, would soon discover that some stories are true, and some legends are just getting started. Captain Dan Rivers was drinking his morning coffee when the alarms started screaming. His cup slipped from his hands and shattered on the floor of his office as red lights flashed throughout Proxima Station. He had been expecting this day for 6 months, ever since the Galactic Council turned their backs on humanity. "Captain, to the bridge," his communications officer called through the speaker. "We have multiple contacts coming out of hyperspace." "It's them, sir. It's the Drakari." Dan ran through the corridors of the space station, his boots echoing on the metal floors. Other crew members rushed past him, heading to their battle stations. Everyone knew this moment would come. The question was whether they were ready for it. The bridge was chaos when Dan arrived. Sensor screens showed dozens of red dots appearing in space around the station. The Drakari ships looked like giant beetles and wasps, their biometal hulls gleaming in the light of the nearby star. "How many?" Stan asked his tactical officer, Lieutenant Carol Stone. 43 hive ships, sir, and they're launching smaller craft. Thousands of them. Carol's voice was steady, but Dan could see the fear in her eyes. "We count at least 10,000 individual Drakari warriors heading our way." Dan looked around his bridge crew. It's 12 good people who had served with him for 3 years. Behind them, throughout the station, were 200 Marines and technicians. They were about to face an enemy that outnumbered them 50 to 1. Send a message to Earth Command, Dan ordered. Tell them the invasion has begun. Proxima Station is under attack. The first wave of Drakari fighters slammed into the station's outer defenses. The creatures didn't use metal ships like humans did. Instead, they flew in living pods that could heal themselves when damaged. Their weapons shot streams of acid that ate through armor plating like it was paper. All breach on Deck 7, reported Chief Engineer Matt Kelly over the radio. The acid is spreading fast. We're losing life support in that section. Dan watched on his screens as his people fought desperately to hold the station. Human Marines fired their rifles at chittering insect warriors the size of bears. The Drakari had 4 arms each, with claws that could tear through metal. Their skin was like natural armor, stopping most bullets. Sir, they're inside the station. Lieutenant Stone called out. Boarding parties on decks 3, 5, and 9. The sounds of battle echoed through the corridors. Human voices shouting orders, mixed with the horrible clicking and hissing of the Drakari warriors. Explosions shook the station as grenades went off in the tight spaces. Sergeant Bill Hayes led his squad of Marines through the maintenance tunnels, trying to reach the civilians trapped in the lower levels. They moved carefully, knowing that Drakari could smell humans from far away. Movement ahead, whispered Private Lisa Cooper, pointing down the dark tunnel. 3 of them. The Drakari warriors were bigger than any earth animal, with glossy black shells and eyes like red jewels. They moved on 6 legs, their 4 arms carrying bioweapons that dripped with poison. Take them down, Hayes ordered. The fight was brutal and quick. Human rifles cracked in a narrow space, while Drakari acid weapons hissed and sparked. 2 Marines fell before the aliens were killed, their bodies smoking from the acid burns. Hayes checked his ammunition, half empty already, and they still had civilians to rescue. This was how the whole battle was going. Every small victory cost them people they couldn't afford to lose. Back on the bridge, Captain Rivers watched the station die around him. Deck after deck fell to the invaders. His people fought for every room, every corridor, but there were just too many enemies. Captain, Chief Kelly called over the radio, his voice tight with pain. Main power is failing. The Drakari acid has eaten through the primary conduits. We've got maybe 10 minutes before total system failure. Dan looked at the tactical display. 3 civilian transport ships were still docked at the station, loading the last evacuees. If the power failed now, those ships would be trapped. Everyone aboard would die. Carol, he said to his tactical officer, how long do we need to get those transports clear? 15 minutes minimum, sir. They're still loading wounded from the hospital section. Dan stared at the numbers on his screen. 10 minutes of power left. 15 minutes needed. The math was simple and horrible. Hence, this is Captain Rivers, he announced over the station-wide communication system. Evacuation transports. Prepare for immediate departure. All remaining personnel, prepare for reactor overload. The bridge crew looked at him with understanding. They had all known this moment might come. Lieutenant Stone nodded and began entering. Commands enter a console. Chief Kelly's voice crackled over the radio. Are you sure about this? Dan thought about his orders from Earth Command. Okay, hold the line. By time for the evacuation fleets. Protect the civilians at any cost. He thought about the aliens who had laughed at human legends, who said humans were too weak to fight real wars. We came here to do a job, Dan said into his microphone. We're going to finish it. All civilian transports. This is your final warning. Depart immediately. Proxima Station will detonate in 8 minutes. The transport ships undocked and began moving away from the station as fast as their engines could push them. On the screens, Dan could see Drakari hive ships moving to intercept them. The explosion would scatter the enemy formation, giving the transports a chance to escape into hyperspace. Sergeant Hayes, his remaining Marines, were still fighting in the lower decks, buying every second they could for the evacuation. Private Cooper was down, acid burns covering half her body. 2 other Marines carried her while Hayes covered their retreat. "This is Hayes to bridge," the sergeant called over his radio. "Lower levels are secure. All civilians are off the station." "Good work, Bill," Dan replied. "Now, get your people to the escape pods." "Negative, sir. Pods are damaged. We'll ride it out down here." Dan closed his eyes for a moment. Good people were about to die because aliens thought humans were too weak to matter. They were about to learn how wrong they were. "All hands," Dan announced. "This is Captain Rivers. It has been an honor serving with you. Tell Earth we held the line." The reactor overload sequence reached its final stage. Throughout the station, the few remaining humans stood at their posts. They had done their job. The civilians were safe. The evacuation fleets had time to reach deeper space. The explosion lit up the dark of space like a new star. 3 Drakari hive ships vanished in the blast, and dozens more were damaged by the expanding wave of energy and debris. The alien formation scattered, a coordinated attack broken apart. The transport ships carrying Proxima stations, civilians, jumped to hyperspace just as the shockwave reached them. They carried news of the battle back to Earth, along with the names of 200 humans who had proven that legends weren't just stories. High Counselor Bixstar received the report 3 days later in his Crystal Palace on the Zephyrian homeworld. He read the tactical analysis twice, unable to believe what he was seeing. A human force outnumbered 50-1 had delayed a major Drakari attack fleet for 6 hours. The cost to the enemy was enormous. "This cannot be accurate," he told his military advisor. "Humans are not capable of such resistance." But the reports kept coming from dozens of worlds across human space. The same story repeated. Human soldiers weren't surrendering. They weren't running away in panic. Instead, they were fighting with a fury that defied all tactical predictions. War Chief Craggle studied the battle recordings on his warship, his 4 arms tracing patterns in the air as he analyzed human tactics. "They fight as if death means nothing to them," he told his officers. "Every human warrior becomes a weapon, even in defeat." Kari were winning their war against humanity, but they were paying a price no one had expected. And across the galaxy, beings who had once laughed at human legends were beginning to wonder if they had made a terrible mistake. Lieutenant Colonel Steve Parker was fixing a broken food dispenser when the Drakari broke through the main defense line. He never thought he would become the most famous human in the galaxy. Steve was a supply officer, not a fighter. His job was making sure soldiers had food, ammunition, and clean uniforms. But when the enemy poured through the gap in human defenses, Steve found himself the highest-ranking officer left on Kepler Station. The station was supposed to be safe. It sat far behind the front lines, storing supplies for the human fleet. Most of the people there were mechanics, cooks, and computer technicians. They fixed ships and counted boxes. They weren't supposed to fight wars, but the Drakari didn't care about supposed to. Their breakthrough caught everyone by surprise. Within hours, 10,000 chittering warriors were heading straight for Kepler Station. Steve had 300 people to defend it. Most of them had never fired a gun in combat. "Sir, what are our orders?" asked Chief Engineer Kate Morgan. She was covered in grease from working on the station's power systems. Her hands shook as she held her rifle. Steve looked around the cargo bay where his people had gathered. Scared faces stared back at him. These weren't soldiers, They were just ordinary people who had signed up to support the war effort from a safe distance. "We hold the station," Steve said simply. Earth Command needs time to reorganize the defense line. We're going to give it to them. The first Drakari assault ships docked with Kepler, stationed 12 hours later. Steve had used that time to turn his supply depot into a fortress. He knew these corridors better than anyone. Every storage room, every maintenance tunnel, every power junction. The Drakari wanted his station. They would have to fight for every inch. Sergeant Amy Walsh led a squad of mechanics against the first boarding party. They used improvised weapons and tools as clubs. The maintenance tunnels became sniper nests where humans could shoot at Drakari warriors and then disappear before the aliens could respond. There, in Cargo Bay 7, Walsh reported over her radio. We stopped them, but lost 2 people. Steve coordinated the defense from the central command room. He watched his people fight and die on the security cameras. Every loss hurt, but he couldn't let emotion cloud his thinking. This was logistics on the deadliest scale. The Drakari had one major advantage. Their hive mind let them coordinate perfectly. When one warrior found human defenders, instantly every other Drakari in the area knew exactly where they were. It was like fighting an enemy that could read each other's thoughts. But Steve began to notice something strange in their attack patterns. The aliens moved together too well. When one group got confused, nearby groups seemed to lose coordination too. It was as if their greatest strength might also be a weakness. Kate, he called to Chief Engineer Morgan over the radio. I need you to look at something. They met in the communications center while battles raged throughout the station. Steve showed Kate the recordings of Drakari attack patterns on his computer screen. Look at this, he said, pointing to a tactical display. When we disrupted their communications in Sector 4, the whole assault wave stopped for almost 10 minutes. Kate studied the data, her engineer's mind working through the problem. They used bioelectric signals to coordinate, she said slowly, like a radio network inside their bodies. Can't we jam it? Kate's eyes went wide as she understood what Steve was suggesting. The communication array, she whispered. If we modify the broadcast frequency, ... They worked together while the battle continued around them. Steve's logistics training had taught him to see patterns and connections. Kate's engineering skills let her turn those patterns into solutions. Together, they created something the galaxy had never seen before. The modified communication array sent out waves of electronic interference, tuned exactly to match Drakari bioelectric frequencies. When Steve activated it for the first time, the effect was immediate and devastating. Throughout the station, Drakari warriors suddenly stopped moving in coordination. Their hive-mind connection was broken. Thousands of aliens who had been thinking as one were suddenly thousands of confused individuals. It's working, Sergeant Walsh reported from Deck 5. They're just standing around looking lost. Some of them are attacking each other. For the first time since the battle began, humans were winning. Steve's improvised army pushed back against the confused Drakari forces. The supply depot that should have fallen in hours had been holding for 3 weeks. News of Kepler station's impossible victory spread across human space faster than light-speed radio waves. For months, humanity had been losing every major battle. Suddenly, they had a weapon that could turn the Drakari's greatest strength against them. But Steve Parker wasn't finished. He understood that his neural disruption technique could change the entire war. The device they had built was crude and short-ranged. With proper development, it could protect entire fleets. The problem was getting the technology to human scientists. Kepler Station was cut off behind enemy lines. Any ship trying to reach them would be destroyed long before it arrived. I have an idea, Steve told Kate as they reviewed intelligence reports in his office. But you're not going to like it. Steve's plan was insane. He wanted to steal a Drakari scout ship and fly it deep into enemy territory. Not to escape, but to capture one of their hive ships intact. With a complete Drakari vessel to study, human scientists could perfect the neural disruption technology. That's suicide, Kate said flatly. Their home territory is 300 light years away. No human has ever gone that deep into swarm space and survived. No human has ever had a reason to try, Steve replied. Now we do. The mission required volunteers. Only, Steve put together a team of 5 people, all experts in different fields. Commander Lisa Hayes, new enemy intelligence systems. Major Tom Bradley could handle any kind of explosive device. Captain Nina Rodriguez was the best pilot on the station. Sergeant Ben Clark understood communication systems better than anyone. They spent 2 weeks preparing the captured Drakari scout ship for the journey. The biomechanical controls were barely understood by human technicians. Flying the thing would be like trying to pilot a living creature that didn't want to cooperate. Are you sure about this, sir? Sergeant Clark asked as they prepared to launch. We could transmit the technical data instead. The neural disruptor plans would reach Earth eventually. Steve looked out at the stars, through the alien ship's organic viewports. Somewhere out there, the Drakari home fleet was coordinating attacks against human worlds. Every day they delayed. More people died. Eventually isn't good enough, he said. People are dying right now while we sit here talking. Stolen scout ship launched from Kepler Station on a trajectory that would take it through dozens of enemy-controlled star systems. Each hyperspace jump brought them closer to the heart of Drakari territory and closer to certain death. But across the galaxy, word of Steve Parker's mission was already spreading. A Kana's officer who had held an impossible position was now attempting an impossible rescue. The aliens who had laughed at human legends were starting to realize that humans didn't see impossible. It's the same way everyone else did. High Counselor Vexstar received reports of the Kepler Station battle in his Crystal Palace. For the first time since the war began, a human force had not only survived, but won a decisive victory. How is this possible? He asked his military advisors. Our analysis showed that humans lacked the coordination for complex defensive operations. War Chief Craggle studied the tactical recordings with growing respect. This human commander used the station itself as a weapon, he told his officers. He turned a supply depot into a fortress using nothing but creativity and determination. Elder Nexari Zelthus processed the data through its collective consciousness. The mathematical models were clear but disturbing. Human combat effectiveness was increasing at an exponential rate. They were learning from every battle, adapting faster than any known species. And now, somewhere in the dark between stars, Steve Parker was flying toward the most dangerous mission in human history. A man who had never wanted to be a hero was about to prove that some legends write themselves. Steve Parker's stolen Drakari scout ship drifted through the nightmare interior of an enemy hive ship. The walls around them pulsed with organic life, covered in slime and strange growths that glowed with sickly green light. The air tasted of metal and decay. This was a ship designed by a species that saw beauty in death and corruption. The mission had gone better than anyone hoped. Commander Lisa Hayes had cracked the security codes that let them dock with the massive vessel. Major Tom Bradley had planted charges that disabled the ship's internal defenses. Captain Nina Rodriguez had kept their stolen ship ready for a quick escape. Sergeant Ben Clark had found the central data core that controlled the entire Drakari fleet in this sector. The information they discovered was beyond their wildest dreams. The data core contained coordination patterns for thousands of hive ships across dozens of star systems. With this intelligence, human scientists could build neural disruptors powerful enough to cripple the entire Drakari war machine. But as they prepared to leave with their prize, everything went wrong. Commander Hayes was the first to fall. A Drakari warrior caught them in the data chamber, its acid spray hitting her in the chest before anyone could react. She screamed once and then collapsed, her uniform smoking from the chemical burns. "Lisa," Steve shouted, but Tom Bradley was already dragging him toward the exit. "She's gone," Tom said roughly. "We have to move now." Okay. They ran through corridors that seemed to twist and change around them. Okay. The hive ship was alive, and it knew intruders were aboard. Walls began closing off passages behind them. Strange growths reached out with grabbing tentacles. Major Bradley sacrificed himself at the next junction. Swarm of Drakari warriors blocked their escape route, chittering and hissing as they raised their bioweapons. Tom looked at the shaped charges on his belt, then at his teammates. "Get the data to Earth," he told them. Then he pulled the pins on every explosive he carried and charged straight into the enemy formation. The explosion shook the entire section of the ship. When the smoke cleared, there was a gaping hole where the corridor used to be. Tom, Bradley, and 15 Drakari warriors were gone, but the path to their ship was clear. Captain Rodriguez got them to the escape pods, but the damaged hive ship was falling apart around them. Debris and acid leaked from broken pipes. Emergency alarms wailed in the alien language that sounded like screaming insects. "The navigation system is fried," Nina reported as she fought with the ship's biomechanical controls. "I can keep us stable long enough for you to reach the pods, but that's all." Steve and Sergeant Clark made it to the final escape pod just as Nina's section of the ship exploded. She died at the controls, keeping their stolen vessel together for 30 more seconds. That was enough time for the pod to clear the destruction dot in the cramped space of the escape pod. Steve stared at the data cores containing the Drakari fleet's secrets. 3 good people had died to get this information. Lisa, Tom, and Nina had given everything so that humanity might have a chance to survive. But their sacrifice would mean nothing if the data didn't reach Earth. Sergeant Clark worked frantically with the pod's damaged navigation system. "We've got 1 hyperspace jump left," he reported. "Maybe enough fuel to reach the border of human space." Steve studied the star charts on the small screen. The nearest human outpost was still deep in contested territory. Even if they made it that far, Drakari patrols would hunt them down long before they could transmit the data. "There's another option," Steve said quietly. "You can send the information by quantum burst transmission." Clark looked up from his controls. "That would take 20 minutes to complete the upload. We'd have to stay in one place and broadcast a signal. Every Drakari ship in the sector would know exactly where we are." Through the pod's small viewport, they could see enemy vessels converging on their position. Dozens of bioships moved toward them like a swarm of angry insects. The hive ship they had raided was sending out distress signals on every frequency. Steve made his decision with the same calm logic he had used to defend Kepler Station. This was just another supply problem, okay? He had data that needed to reach its destination and limited resources to get it there. "You take the pod and jump out," he told Clark. "I'll handle the transmission." "Sir, we both know that's not going to work," Clark replied. "You're the hero here. You're supposed to survive and get the medal." Steve smiled at that. Heroes in the stories always lived to see the end. But real heroes knew that sometimes winning meant not coming home. "Ben, listen to me," Steve said as he started overriding the pod's safety systems. "Those aliens back at the Galactic Council were wrong about one thing. Human legends aren't about the people who survive. They're about the people who make sure others can survive." Steve programmed the pod to broadcast the largest sensor signature possible. Instead of hiding from the Drakari fleet, he would draw every ship in the system straight to him. While they chased his pod, the quantum transmission would have time to reach Earth. "Tell them we held the line," Steve said as he activated the transmission sequence. The data began streaming toward Earth at faster than light speed. Technical specifications for neural disruptors, tactical analyses of Drakari weaknesses, and complete hive ship coordination protocols. everything human scientists needed to turn the tide of the war. Steve flew his escape pod through the asteroid, filled like a fighter pilot, using every trick he had learned during the siege of Kepler Station. He fired the pod's few weapons at pursuing Drakari ships, not trying to destroy them, but to make them angry enough to follow him. The chase lasted 17 minutes. Steve's improvised tactics and desperate maneuvers kept the enemy fleet busy, while precious data flowed toward human space. Drakari bioweapons finally overwhelmed the pod's defenses. The transmission was complete. Steve Parker's last words were heard across half the galaxy through emergency radio frequencies. Data sent. Use it well. Tell them we held the line. The explosion that destroyed his pod also damaged 3 Drakari cruisers. Even in death, Steve continued to fight. The quantum transmission reached Earth Command 6 hours later. Human scientists immediately began working on new weapons based on Steve's intelligence. The neural disruptor technology was refined into ship-mounted arrays that could disable entire Drakari fleets. But Steve's death did more than just provide technical data. News of his sacrifice spread across the galaxy faster than any official report. The man who had held an impossible position and completed an impossible mission became the symbol of something the galaxy had never seen before. Counselor Vexter read the intelligence reports in his crystal palace with growing unease. The Zephyrian Empire had fought wars for thousands of years, but they had never encountered an enemy willing to die. For purely altruistic reasons, War Chief Craggle studied the recordings of T's final battle with professional admiration. This human fought not for territory or wealth, he told his officers. He fought for an idea. That kind of enemy cannot be defeated with conventional weapons. Elder Nexari Salthus processed the implications through its collective consciousness. Steve Parker's sacrifice had changed the mathematical balance of the war. But more disturbing was the psychological impact spreading across the galaxy. Refugees populations from a dozen species spoke of human heroism with religious reverence. Resistance movements against the Drakari invoked Steve Parker's name as a battle cry. Even captured Drakari warriors, when questioned, showed what could only be described as respect for their human enemies. The species that had laughed at human legends now whispered them in their own languages. And deep in space, human fleets, equipped with new weapons based on Steve Parker's sacrifice, began their counterattack against an enemy that was learning too late what human legends really meant. Admiral Chris Taylor stood on the bridge of the U.S. Steve Parker, watching the final battle of the war unfold on the main screen. The massive human dreadnought was equipped with the most advanced neural disruption array ever built, based on the intelligence that Steve Parker had died to deliver. 1 year had passed since Steve's sacrifice. 1 year since the galaxy learned that human legends were not just stories. Now, as Chris watched Drakari hive ships drift helplessly through space, their coordination completely shattered, he knew that Steve's death had changed everything. Fire the main array, Chris ordered. The neural disruption beam struck the center of the Drakari fleet formation. Instantly, thousands of bioships that had been moving as one perfect unit began spinning out of control. Their hive mind connection was broken, leaving each vessel isolated and confused. Direct hit on their command ship, reported Lieutenant Sam Davis from the tactical station. The entire fleet has lost coordination. They're firing on each other now. Chris nodded grimly. This was how every major battle had gone for the past 6 months. Human fleets, equipped with neural disruption technology, systematically dismantled Drakari formations across the galaxy. The weapons derived from Steve Parker's intelligence proved even more effective than anyone had hoped. But the real victory wasn't measured in destroyed enemy ships. It was seen in the message that had arrived from the Galactic Council that morning. The emergency session on the Council space station was unlike anything in galactic history. Representatives from dozens of alien species filled the great chamber, but this time they weren't laughing. High Counselor Vexstar approached the speaking platform with his crystalline form dimmed in shame. "We have gathered today," Vexstar began, his translator carrying his words throughout the chamber to formally apologize to the human delegation. "We mocked what we called legends. We failed to understand that these were not stories, but glimpses into a nature we had never encountered, Ambassador." Lisa Grant sat in the front row, wearing her dress uniform with the new medal honoring Steve Parker's sacrifice. Beside her, the other human delegates listened as the aliens who had once dismissed them now spoke with respect and humility. War Chief Craggle rose to his full height, his 4 massive arms spread wide in a gesture of honor. "Vorthan Empire has studied warfare for thousands of years," he declared. "But humans have taught us that the greatest battles are not won through superior weapons, but through superior character." The giant alien's words echoed through the chamber. Around the room, other delegates nodded in agreement. The species that had fought each other for centuries were united in their new understanding of what courage really meant. Elder Naxari Salthus projected its collective thoughts into the neural network. "Our analysis has identified a critical factor we previously dismissed. Humans possess a capacity for growth through adversity that we have never observed. Each human who falls in battle does not represent a loss of strength, but a multiplication of resolve in those who remain." The formal vote was unanimous. Not only was Earth granted full membership in the Galactic Council, humanity was invited to help restructure the entire alliance around principles learned from the war. But perhaps the most surprising moment came when the Drakari delegation arrived. The former hive mind warriors looked different now. Without their collective consciousness connecting them, each Drakari had learned to think as an individual. They moved more carefully, spoke more quietly, and their red eyes showed something that had never existed in their species before: genuine emotion. The Drakar speaker was a warrior named Zekdal, who had fought at the siege of Kepler Station. He approached the human delegation with slow, respectful steps. "We came to your worlds as destroyers," Zekdal said in halting but clear English. "You could have destroyed us in return when you won the war. Instead, you chose to teach us what? We had never learned: how to be individuals, how to choose our own paths." Dr. Rachel White, head of the Drakari Rehabilitation Program, stood up to address the assembly. The Drakari fought as they did because their hive mind couldn't understand individual choice or sacrifice. Now, freed from that collective programming, they're learning to coexist peacefully. Many former warriors are working alongside human engineers to rebuild the worlds damaged in the war. The transformation was remarkable. Drakari, who had once consumed entire planets, were now helping to restore ecosystems. Warriors, who had known only destruction, were learning to create and build. The galaxy had never seen such a complete change in a species. Nature. High Counselor Vexstar announced the Council's final decision. The Galactic Alliance will be restructured around principles learned from human warfare: the protection of the innocent, the value of individual sacrifice for collective good, the belief that any species can change given the opportunity. The memorial ceremony took place at the exact coordinates where Steve Parker had died. Representatives from 47 different species attended, each bringing artifacts from their own cultures to honor not just Steve, but all the humans who had proven that legends could be lived rather than merely told. Ambassador Lisa Grant, now Secretary General of the Reformed Galactic Council, delivered the dedication speech. Her words were broadcast across the galaxy and translated into thousands of languages. "They laughed at our legends because they saw them as impossible stories," she said. "They couldn't understand that for humans, impossible is simply another word for necessary. Steve Parker and every human who gave their life in this war didn't fight to become legends. They fought to ensure others could live to create their own. Dam. Memorial's central stone was carved from earth granite and inscribed with Steve's final words. Tell them we held the line. But beneath it, added by unanimous vote of the Galactic Council, were words that defined humanity's true legacy. And, in holding it, they taught us all what it means to be truly alive. Years passed. The war became history, studied by young beings from across the galaxy. But they didn't learn about superior tactics or advanced technology. They learned about the species that transformed defeat into victory through the simple refusal to abandon their principles. Captain Dan Rivers was remembered for his sacrifice at Proxima Station. Colonel Amy Walsh was honored for her defense of New Eden. Steve Parker became the symbol of impossible missions, made possible through determination and courage. But the real victory wasn't in the monuments or the medals. It was in the children of former enemies playing together on rebuilt worlds. It was in the Drakari engineers working alongside human scientists. It was in the knowledge that species who had once fought to destroy each other now fought to protect each other. The Galactic Council chambers, once filled with the sound of mocking laughter, now echoed with voices united in common purpose. Aliens who had dismissed human legends as fairy tales now told their own stories of courage and sacrifice, learned from the species that proved some things are worth dying for, and more importantly, worth living for. In the end, humanity's greatest victory wasn't conquering the galaxy, it was teaching the galaxy to conquer itself.